Johann Amos Comenius was a Pansophyst born in 1592 and lived during the 1600s. He was a member of the Unity of the Brethren, where he was a pastor, and during the 30 Years' War, he had to leave his home. The conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants had reached his doorstep. Literally, they set it on fire, and he fled with his wife and two children, who over the next 7 years died from the plague. So after that 7 years, he fled to Poland, where he lived in exile for the next 42 years, developing his theory of education, Pansophy. Pansophy is an idea of incorporating all knowledge and unifying it. He developed this through a unification of his theology, realism, and dualism. His theology, he believed that God was the source of all truth, and that under that umbrella, you can fit all knowledge, all understanding, and through that unity, then people will come to be unified themselves and bring peace and end the violence that he was so accustomed to. He also learned a lot of lessons from realism for his philosophy, believing that things progress in a very natural order, and brought that to his education, believing that things should be taught sequentially. Also that there's a season for everything, and so he applied that and saw developmental stages in children, starting with the first 6 years of life, and then moving on to the next 6 and the final 6, each developmental stage being unique and growing in that child. Also, through realism, saw that nature provided a great means for children to experience things and build their understanding through their senses. And so he was a big proponent of sensory education. His idea of dualism was that the natural and supernatural are complementary. So starting with the chaos of the natural, through education, becoming to reflect more of the supernatural and the orderly and the mature. He put all of this theory into practice in his primary and secondary schools. They were to reflect the second and third stages of development for children, the first being at home with the mother, where she could provide an emotionally secure environment. Also, for his children, he wanted their teachers to be educated. They should be able to combine all of that unified knowledge, present it effectively, efficiently, and in an orderly manner. And he also used a lot of sensory education, and he mainly did this through his textbook, Orbis Pictus, which is one of the first illustrated textbooks. And he used that idea of dualism too in all of his pictures. On the left side, showing nature and chaos and youth and immaturity, going to the right side where there is the sun and maturity and civilization, and showing that those two things, through education, one leads to the other. His perspective on diversity is that the government should provide education for all people about all things. And by teaching everybody, they all come to that common knowledge and can find unity and peace. Finally, critical analysis. He was mostly ignored throughout history, though a lot of his ideas showed up in Rousseau's writing, especially in Emile. Emile, he talked about Emile being this ideally educated child who was only presented things when it was appropriate, leading through those developmental stages that Comenius talked about, also engaging in his senses to build that, and not being educated with corporal punishment, so no corporal punishment. All of those ideas coming from and originating with Comenius. And then Comenius's work was later rediscovered by Piaget and Jalnek, mostly though being interpreted through a secular lens instead of the religious lens that Comenius originally intended. And we see that in Moreland's writing, especially with his 3 types of knowledge, of simple seeing, know-how, and propositional knowledge. So starting with that simple seeing and know-how, Comenius incorporated a lot of that into his primary education, building crafts and engaging the senses in those objects. And then in the secondary school, developing more of that propositional knowledge and judgment. For today, if we incorporate Comenius's ideas, it can actually improve our reading education. Recent research is showing that Americans have stagnated in their reading ability because our focus has been on testing, and so they're focused on these small specific texts, trying to analyze those, and losing a lot of that broader picture that Comenius argued for, having that broad knowledge. And so by incorporating back in some of that background knowledge, some of that context that people naturally bring to their reading that aren't necessarily spelled out in some of those smaller limited texts, it can improve overall reading ability. So Comenius, wonderful educator, and we should bring back some of those ideas and hopefully even see some of that peace that he hoped for brought to today.